Joining us now, Alan Dershowitz, former professor, emeritus professor at Harvard, author of the great book Trumped Up, came out this summer, and he joins us now. Professor Dershowitz, great to talk to you. Lots happened since the last time we chatted. Where do you see things now? Let's first just talk about what we've learned about these various characters inside the Mueller investigation, whether thousands of texts disappeared or whether it was some system-wide shortage. We don't really know the entire fact pattern there, but clearly there's concern that this investigation from the start was wrongly founded and that at least some of the people on the team are far too partisan to give this the appearance of objectivity.
Well, as you know, right from the beginning, I thought it was a mistake to appoint a special counsel when there was no evidence of actual crime, because obstruction of justice can't be charged against the president if he is simply exercising his Article II authority, and any kind of collusion with Russia, even if there were evidence of it, is not a crime. That's why I called for an independent, nonpartisan, non-criminal commission to look into the role that either the Russians or anybody else tried to have in our election, because all Americans, Republican and Democrat, are equally concerned about efforts to destabilize American democracy. Having said that, I do think that the issues of whether or not the investigation is fair is largely a political issue. You're not going to win legally. You're not going to be able to take the case to the Supreme Court and say it's a perjury trap, it's unfair. There is one basis on which I think, though, the president could legitimately refuse to answer questions, and that is if they ask him about why he fired Comey. I think he can appropriately say, sorry, but I'm the President of the United States. The Constitution gives me the authority to fire for any reason, and nobody has the right to probe my motives. And I'm just not going to answer questions relating to why I exercise my constitutional authority, whether it's about firing Comey or asking Comey to go easy on Flynn, or if I were to pardon anybody. Those are beyond the authority of any prosecutor to inquire. That's an issue of separation of powers and checks and balances, and I stand on my constitutional power under Article II, and if you think I should be compelled to answer those questions, take it to the Supreme Court, let them decide, and whatever the Supreme Court decides, I will respond appropriately. I think that would be an appropriate response. I think just saying, I'm not going to answer questions because I don't like the investigation, that won't work. And of course, if he doesn't, if he's not willing to compromise and sit down for some kind of a question and answer, Mueller always has the ace in the hole. He can just subpoena him and have him testify in front of the grand jury with no lawyer present, closed doors, no video, no time restrictions, no restrictions on what questions he can ask. Then, of course, if that were to happen, there would be political opposition to it. But legally, a president can be compelled to testify in front of a grand jury. So I think we're going to see a negotiation, and in the end, the president will have no choice. Now, you know, the newspapers and the media have been making a big deal of the fact that the president said he's willing to testify under oath. Of course he should be willing to testify under oath, because it doesn't matter whether you testify under oath. It's a crime to lie not under oath to a prosecutor. So if he says he's willing to testify under oath, that's a very smart thing to say, because it gives his statements more credibility with the general public, but it makes no difference legally.
Yeah, you can be prosecuted for perjury if you're not sworn in. So if Hillary lied back in that 4th of July weekend interview she did in 2016, I guess it was, well...
If she did, then she is vulnerable. It's not perjury. It's called 1001. It's a separate statute that says making false statements to a law enforcement official is a crime. It's a federal crime. Some states have that. Some states don't have that. But federally, it's a crime.
I have a
That's how
question.
Martha Stewart
got in trouble.
Went to jail as the result.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have another question that listeners have been emailing me about. So if Trump actually doesn't recall things, and I remember with Reagan, you know, there's a lot of things they asked him in the interrogatories he didn't recall. At one point, does not recalling get you in trouble criminally?
Well, it's like anything else. If he honestly doesn't recall, then it's the truthful answer. If, you know, there are cases, we know there are cases where lawyers, sleazy, unethical lawyers, tell their clients not to recall things that, of course, they recall. That's a crime both for the person who testifies and for the lawyer. It's called subornation of perjury. But if you honestly don't recall, and a lawyer should tell you that, don't try to make things up. If you honestly don't recall, you're a busy person. If you honestly don't recall, the truthful, non-perjurious answer is, I don't recall. And you can't get into trouble for not recalling if you don't recall. Now, the follow-up question will be, let me quote from something you said, Mr. President. You said you had the best memory of anybody, that you never forget anything. How could you forget if you said this? But people do forget. I have a good memory. I forget. Everybody forgets, particularly, he's getting up in years. I'm getting up in years. You don't have the same kind of sharp memory you did when you were 25. You wouldn't know that. You're so young.
Yeah, right. No, I was just saying, Alan.
People have to understand that. Right.
Alan, I was just saying, people would say, "Well, what did you do last weekend?" No, it takes me like 5 seconds to remember. Well, wait a second. Well, Friday. So it's the idea that you remember. I don't remember specific conversations I had last February. Maybe generally.
And let's take, for example, the McCabe conversation. People remember what the president told them because they're speaking to the president.
Right.
How often do you get to speak to the president? Of course you remember everything the president told you, but the president doesn't remember everything he told everybody because he gets to speak to people every minute of every day, whereas other people get to speak to the president, once in a lifetime. So, of course, there's going to be disparities in memories, and it could be they're both telling you the truth. McCabe says, I remember he said that. The president says, no, I don't remember saying that. Both can be absolutely telling the truth.
We're talking to Alan Dershowitz here on the Laura Ingraham Show. Alan, the idea of this House Intel Committee memo and releasing it to the public, and there's findings in it about the FISA court and how the FISA warrants were obtained, apparently. That now the Justice Department has sent a letter over to Devin Nunes and essentially saying this would be extremely reckless to release this without our going through it, and we urge you not to do so. The sources I've talked to on Intel say, and these are the highest levels, say that there is no national security implication in this memo, and anything that could even have hinted at that could easily be redacted. What's your sense about it?
That's clearly correct. Look, every civil libertarian, whether you're conservative or liberal, should be concerned about overreaching by the FBI, about misuse of material to get a FISA warrant. Every civil libertarian should be concerned. The irony is now the civil libertarians on my side, the liberal civil libertarians, are suddenly giving the FBI a pass. I mean, we've been railing against the FBI since J. Edgar Hoover, but suddenly, because they're going after Trump, they get a pass. And many conservatives who always support the FBI are saying, not this time, they're going after Trump. I think we have to have an objective assessment of the FBI. It does a great deal of good. There are people who work there, 24/7, 7 days a week, do fantastic work. I've had a lot of experience with the FBI, but there are bad apples. And, people who have strong views, like that FBI agent, should not be tasked to go after the President of the United States, or should not be tasked to investigate the person who ran against him. You need some objectivity when you're investigating the highest offices and the highest candidates. And I think Mueller failed in this regard. He should have been much more careful about who he hired. He should have been much more careful about asking each of them, do you have any memos? Do you have any emails? Do you have any texts that will come back and embarrass us? And the FBI agent himself should have said, look, I'm going to recuse myself. I have strong views. I don't feel I can be objective about this. He's now hired a lawyer, and we'll see what happens, but I think he should be fired.
Well, I said this last night on the Ingram Angle in my monologue, that it is pretty interesting that given the fact that so many on the left have been really since J. Edgar Hoover and, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement and Freddie Gray and all the stuff with St. Louis, the police are, under the microscope for civil rights violations and perhaps racism and so forth. Mm-hmm. And now it's, you can never criticize. Bob Mueller is a patriot. Bob Mueller served in the military. Yeah, that all can be true, and he could be a great guy and really, really smart. Now, all of that can be true, and he might have made some mistakes and oversight. That's what I've been saying. all
No
along.
question about that. And every civil libertarian should have a single standard of criticism for when any intelligence agency, the FBI, the CIA, goes beyond their authority. It's always going to be dangerous, and you need to have checks. In addition to our usual checks and balances we learn from civics, the media has to serve as a check. The academy has to serve as a check. We all have to serve as checks on the potential excesses of intelligence agencies. And just because they're going after somebody you don't like doesn't mean that the possibility of abuse isn't as great. In fact, it's greater, because when you have kind of ideological prosecutions, then the likelihood of excess is even greater. Look, I go back, I'm old enough to remember when the FBI and the Kennedy administration worked hand in hand to wiretap Martin Luther King and try to get information about his sex life. And then the head of the FBI wrote a letter to Martin Luther King saying you should commit suicide because otherwise we're going to reveal that you had sex when you were in Stockholm, getting the Nobel Prize. And we've seen abuses. I wrote about that back in the 1960s and 70s, and I haven't changed my views. I love the FBI when it does good, and I'm going to be critical of them when they don't do good. I would still like to take J. Edgar Hoover's name off the FBI building because I don't think he sends the right message. He had, files on everybody and had them over a barrel, and it's very dangerous when security services can use information for personal or political gain, and that's why the dossier is important, and that's why it's important that the American public have transparency and see everything they can. With redactions, I agree, but the FBI knows how to redact, the Justice Department knows how to redact, the national security agencies know how to redact, and we should see everything we possibly can to make our own judgments.
Before we let you go, we're almost out of time. Congress last summer, like Lindsey Graham and Tom Tillis and was Chris Coons and a couple of others, they tried to promote legislation, pass legislation. It didn't ultimately work. That would have insulated the special counsel from firing. One, he couldn't be fired. Number two, if he was fired, he could challenge his termination in court.
The Supreme Court has spoken on that issue. The Supreme Court, when President Johnson was impeached in the 1860s, he was impeached for firing the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of War, and because Congress had passed a statute saying we confirm him, you can't fire him. The Supreme Court later ruled that that's unconstitutional.
Right.
Even officials who are confirmed by the Senate but appointed by the President can be fired by the President.
At will.
And at will, it's possible Congress can place some constraints, but I don't think they can give judicial review. That would be a separation of powers problem, giving the judiciary the power to control the president's appointments.
Fascinating. A separation of powers, and Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 powers here implicated. Professor Dershowitz, always great to talk to you. Hope you come on TV soon.